Okay, thank you, Esme, and thank you to the city of Avondale. And I don't know how you want to work like questions. Do you want them to just keep them at the end? That's usually how you do it, right?
Yeah, we just keep
Okay.
them at the end.
Okay, I just wanted to say that up front before I forgot
Great.
it and people had questions.
Great.
Just a little bit about myself. Welcome, folks, for tuning in today on this Zoom class. I actually am not from Arizona. I originally am from Ohio. I moved to Arizona in the mid 1980s. And I'm kind of giving you this background because Arizona is really different for vegetable gardening. And I wanted to kind of show you my journey in case some of you folks are also on a journey of trying to learn gardening here in Arizona. But we lived on a 10-acre farm there in Ohio. We weren't actually farmers. We were surrounded by farmers. But we did have a 2 to 3 acre vegetable garden every year, and we had a small apple orchard of about seven trees. And my brother and I, when we were kids growing up, we sold corn. We mostly grew sweet corn and tomatoes, and some green beans and a few other things. But we had at least an acre in sweet corn. And we sold beefsteak tomatoes. If you're not familiar with those, they get the size of grapefruits or bigger. So this is what I was used to when I moved to Arizona. So my first year out here, I didn't have a job, and I spent a little bit of time. I saved some money so I could kind of relax and enjoy Arizona a little bit before I started teaching. And then a friend I met out here, told me of a temporary job working for a landscaper. So the first time I had a job out here was just like a part-time thing. And the first place we went, they said, here's a trash can, take it out back around this lady's patio and pick the weeds. So I thought, this is easy. I've picked weeds before. So I go back and I'm just kind of enjoying the day. It was a really nice day and listening to the birds and picking weeds. And I got about half a trash can full, and I came up and they said, oh my gosh, what did you do? And I was like, I picked all these weeds. And they said, no, you just picked all this lady's wildflowers coming up. And I was like, oh my gosh, they look like weeds to me. And so at that point, I thought, maybe I should learn about where I'm at. And so I enrolled in Master Gardener class, and I continued actually landscaping to the point where I started my own landscape business. So I took Master Garden class, and my eyes got wide open that I did not know anything out here about gardening. So, and from then I ended up working eventually for the city of Glendale in a position similar to Esme's in their environmental programs. And I've also gotten some certifications besides the Master Gardener, also a certification as a sustainable building advisor. So I'm going to start out with the ugly or the bad, the bad, the good, and the ugly, I guess. But this is the bad, the spiral of death for plants here in Arizona. This is from Terry Michaels. I learned this from him at he put this together. He was an extension agent. And I like to mention his name because he just recently passed. And he is like the godfather of gardening and agriculture and crops living in Arizona his entire life. So he put this, pardon me?
I said, I actually have a tree that he gave me.
Oh yeah, he was famous for being very generous with giving out plants and information, and one of the nicest guys I think I ever met. So he is sorely missed in the community. But this is what he put together, and it goes from the most likely reason why a plant dies to the least likely reason why a plant dies. So if a plant is not well adapted to this region, it is somewhat doomed from the get-go. Okay, a lot of our vegetables that we get, and especially seeds, may not be that adapted here. So I'll talk more about that. And then the improper planting season, especially for vegetables. If you're planting them at the wrong time of the year, in in climate conditions that are not appropriate for that plant, you're going to have a hard time keeping it alive and then getting it to grow to the point where you can actually harvest. Poor conditions of our planting soil. I'll talk more extensively about all these. Climate extremes. Oh, wow, do we have climate extremes here? Yes, 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 especially in the summer. And so I do see a lot of people coming from back east and other places, even California, that come and don't realize just how hot it is here in the summer. And a lot of people want to grow their vegetables in the summer because that's where they grew them. That's the time of year they grew them when they were living in other places. Soil compaction. We have a lot of soil compaction here. Other various soil problems, such as not having really a living soil. Our heat can bake our soil to the point where we don't have a lot of microorganisms in the soil. Improper watering. I see that a lot. And I'll talk about that in particular as well. Poor placement. And this means how much sun or shade that the plants are getting, especially for vegetables. Construction or excavation activities. Yeah, if someone digs it up, it's probably not going to live. And then insects, disease, and air pollution. I think the interesting thing about this list, the ones on the bottom are the least likely to cause the plant death. A lot of times people think insects are killing it, but insects will invade a plant that is weak or already dying. And disease is the same thing. Disease will affect plants that are weak or already dying. So it's really not the primary cause there. So our low desert climate, we have dry, hot spring winds. So if you're trying to grow in the spring, you will be dealing with hot, dry winds and low humidity. So there's not a lot of moisture in the air. And then if you're trying to grow vegetables in the summer, you're experiencing extreme nighttime temperatures as well as daytime temperatures. And plants, especially vegetables that aren't adapted to the desert, and most of them we grow are not that adapted, they will suffer at never getting a break. It's hotness in the daytime and hot at night. That is really hard on them. And then just lack of rainfall, which we're experiencing now in this extreme in the last year. Our poor soil conditions. A lot of times we have landscape rock over soils and people just pull it over and start planting things. That landscape rock, if it's been there for a long time, has really baked that soil. We also experience that baked soil and that heat. There's a lack of organic matter from the heat and too much tilling sometimes. The picture down there in the corner is actually of a mulched, sheet mulching, where I put newspaper and cardboard down over really poor soil and then put straw and then some more compost. And then after time, you can actually pull it. This was under all that. It was under the cardboard. So I had cardboard and straw and a little more compost. This is what I found under the cardboard after about a year and a half. So what that cardboard did, it held moisture, it shielded it from the sun and baking, and it started composting and loosening the soil underneath. So you can actually create your own soil in that manner, and I'll give you some real details on sheet mulching. So then our normal, or what we typically see in our yards is a caliche, especially if you're in a desert area. And this is a calcium carbonate, and it's almost like a cemented layer of soil here. Our soils are very alkaline and only in about a 7 to 8.5 pH. And you know, that's the other thing to recognize is you know, adding like soil sulfur actually will help with pH over time, but you have to apply it several times. So some general good desert gardening practices. I'll go from the general to the more specific. Use seasonal vegetable garden guides. I will recommend some and where you can get those. Plant desert adapted tolerant varieties. And these guides also help with that. Use soil amendments, organic matter, compost, and mulch. Those are the organic matters. And then soil, sulfur that I mentioned, or gypsum. Good placement of beds so you have proper sun and shading, in particular shading in the afternoon if you're planting or growing your vegetables at any time where it's very hot. Protect from heat and cold extremes and maximize your water efficiency. Watering too much is as bad as not having enough water. Okay, so I'm going to go through some of the planting seasons. So if you want to start like late summer, we're talking like mid-July to mid-September, which we typically also call our monsoon season. So it's not a terrible time to start because Mother Nature may be helping you out with some good rains. So you can get started early. That seeds will readily germinate. They will tend to readily germinate. You could plant any seed that time and it'll probably germinate, but you want to plant the monsoon type crops that will survive the withering heat that comes in September, well, August and September after the plants have actually germinated and start growing. It's probably really good to start covering at that time of year. Although I cover even now at times, but particularly will cover all the way into the end of October. And this year it was pretty warm in October. And so I was providing shade as far as covering with either, I have 50% shade cloth, and I also use burlap. Burlap's about the same. I kind of prefer the burlap. It's a little easy to work with. And you can get these, let's see, I think they're 4 foot by 4 foot, maybe 5 foot by 5 foot. Yeah, they'd probably be 5 foot by 5 foot squares of burlap that landscapers use to tie up their trimmings. You can get those like at any of the, I will say that probably the easiest place to make sure they have when you go in, it would be one of the sprinkler houses that just sell sprinkler parts. They will have that, and they're less expensive than the shade cloth too. So traditional monsoon crops at this time of year would be temporary beans, corn, Itoolite, onion starts. Those are traditional to this, to Arizona. And Native Americans here, or Native folks here actually grew these crops. So what you might think of typical vegetables that a lot of us are familiar with: cantaloupe, pumpkin, winter squash. Okay, you don't plant those in the same bed because they can cross-pollinate. Black-eyed peas or cowpeas. And they also make a great cover crop, which means not only can you harvest them, but they are a nitrogen fixer. And I'll talk more about nitrogen fixing plants and how you know if they are or not. But nitrogen fixing means they actually put fertilizer in the ground for you. So keep leafy greens, tomato, cole crops, starts protected indoors. So if you're buying little tiny starts of these at like a nursery, you might want to keep them in a little bit if it's too hot, or if you do plant them out, and usually it would be tomatoes at this time, I would think. If it's like still like August or September, you're definitely going to have to put shading on them. So the easiest time to grow stuff here is waiting until mid-September to October for more of the cool season planting. I'll talk more about that on this slide. So cool season planting grow best in cool temperatures, obviously average below 70 degrees. So the high of the day is usually over or under 70 degrees. You plant from March, you can plant these cool season vegetables from October to March, and you can plant them throughout that time. I find that mid to late October is the best time to get the plants to actually germinate. And then depending on what kind of winter we have, like it's been a very mild winter this year, that succession planting you will not have to wait real long for the seeds to germinate. Sometimes if it gets really cold, it may take a while. So most of these cool season vegetables for the fall are frost tolerant. So if they have a really, really hard freeze, they will still probably be okay. Cool season seeds may germinate in warmer soils, but they need that cooler weather to grow. So you could grow some of these cool season vegetables, which I'll list, but if you try to grow them in the summer, they'll come up and everything, and then they'll just kind of wither out because it doesn't matter how much water you give them or even shade. Sometimes they just don't grow well with cooler weather, with the warmer weather. They also may struggle with very, very low humidity, and that's one of the typical problems year-round for trying to grow tomatoes. So fall gardens typically include the cole crops and the leafy greens, and I'll show you what those are. So cool season fall vegetables that we've been talking about here are the cole crops, and these are all of them that have that in their name, a lot of them. Broccoli rapini, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, kohlrabi, cabbage, bok choy, Chinese cabbage, and kales, all the kales and leafy greens. The middle picture, that is the kohlrabi, and broccoli on the left as you're looking at the screen, and then red cabbage on the right. It's best to eat as you harvest. And so you can, if you've planted several, you can continue to keep harvesting. And some, like even broccoli, sometimes people don't realize if you cut a head of broccoli off, the plant is not dead. You'll still get some flowerets growing. So plant in different garden places each year or in pots with new soil. This is because most of these, particularly the broccolis, and the cabbage, the ones that get big heads on them, they typically take a lot of nitrogen out of the soil. So if you want those crops to grow a little faster and have bigger harvest, sprinkling them, I use, we don't typically recommend brands, but it's really hard to find a good organic one. So I am going to recommend this one because it's about the only one I found. And it's a Miracle-Gro Shake and Feed. And it's kelp, earthworm castings, feather meal, and bone meal. And it looks like this. And you shake it out. So it's really good for a backyard gardener. I know it looks backwards to you guys probably, but it's called Shake and Feed. I like it. You can find something else, but most of these crops here, they do a lot better if you can give them a couple fertilizings with that, and it's a slow release and it's organic. So these cool season vegetables also include leafy greens: arugula, spinach, kale, chard, mustard, sorrel, microgreens, and loose leaf lettuces. And here was my bounty last year when I picked on in the bowl. The salad bowl is all kinds of salads with some arugula flowers in the white, and then the orange and yellow are nasturtium flowers. So I grow flowers that are edibles where as well it makes a more interesting salad. And then at the top you can see various Swiss chard and kale and snow peas. You can't, on many of the snow peas, you can eat the pod as well as the peas inside. And then some lettuce is there, and then the bottom right is spinach. Okay. So cool season, this fall season. Again, these are the ones I recommend planting probably about mid-October, because it's getting cool enough that once they come up, it's not as hard to keep them, the moisture to them, so that the plants don't shrivel. These include beets, radish, turnips, garlic, onions, carrots, and potatoes. And again, these are things that can be planted throughout this cool season. Right now would be the last time for the cool season here in January to plant any of these from seed, probably. So cool season herbs would be cilantro, parsley, dill, fairway, fennel, and some mints. Now some of these will reseed, and I'm cool with that, like parsley and cilantro. This is a bed actually that I planted artichoke that you can see up at the top, in that tomato cage. And I planted that 2 years ago, and it came up again in that bed, and I said, go ahead. I just kind of, sometimes you don't get the best crop from these, but I just like to see what they'll do. It's just a curiosity. And then there's some kale in that bed that I seeded that year, but there's a lot of cilantro and parsley in there that just volunteered itself from a previous year in that actual bed. So that's kind of the cool thing about some of the herbs, that they will reseed on their own. So warm season. So we're getting into a different time of the year to start planting. And our warm season would be spring, summer. These plants grow best in temperatures above 65 degrees. Begin in March to get a longer season of vegetables, especially with the dry beans. So some of these summer vegetables take a longer time to come to maturity and be able to be picked. Most veggies with seeds, fruit, okay, are warm season. Okay, think of tomatoes on that. They actually have seeds in them. All beans are nitrogen fixing. So fava beans, tapiary beans, green beans, they all fix nitrogen in the soil. So they actually they are a fertilizer as well as a crop. Heat lovers like basil and corn do a little bit better if you plant during summer monsoon, but they can be planted in the spring as well. They just really, really like the heat. Of course, with corn in particular, they like they use quite a bit of water too. So corn is really tough here to grow for two reasons. The season that they grow in, it's really hard to keep them enough moisture because of our evaporation rate and our hot temperatures. And then you have to, most corns varieties, they have to pollinate. So you need a lot of corn plants to pollinate for the ears to fill out completely. So most backyard gardeners don't have that kind of space to dedicate just to corn. And then warm season will require, these warm season crops, good water and a good shade system. So it takes a little more work if you want to do these crops as opposed to the ones we just talked about, the cole crops and root crops. So typically because of this, you will experience over and underwatering problems. And I'll talk about how to water on a future slide here. Okay, so about our desert soils. This is a picture I took out in the preserve, and you can see there's like this more of a dark brownish than what the rocks are. That is a crust that's on our soils. And that is a good thing for the desert because it keeps the soil from blowing away. And it's a living organic crust. Now, when we build a house on this, that all gets disturbed and that's gone. So the soils we have at our houses are, for the most part, probably do not have this protective crust, this living crust that is native to our desert soils. So the soils start blowing away. They don't hold the water that they would normally hold because this crust actually swells and holds water over time. So if you go out, you can see, either in your backyard and go and compare out in a desert area where it hasn't been disturbed. Our desert soils, if you look at the color texture, the color is really pale usually. Our texture is really fine and it'll just kind of blow away in your hand if you pick it up. It's alkaline. You'll find caliche. I live near a desert preserve area and yes, there is caliche in my house. The first time I tried to plant a tree, we took out caliche boulders the size of, they were about 2 foot by 2 foot. I ended up making a boulder, using those boulders to make a small, dry pond. That's how big they were. So that's our desert soils. It's compacted. It has caliche. It has sometimes in some homes you have some urban layering. In other words, whatever the builders brought in, whatever people before you brought in with the soil. Usually that urban layering, it can, if it's you have an older house, you can find bricks in there. You can find previous rock. You can find plastic that someone put in there. So we have our desert soils are a conglomeration of a lot of stuff that makes it difficult to plant right in and have a vegetable garden. But most of all, lack of organic matter. So what do you use? What you want to use is compost. So what is compost? You want things that are composted. Probably most of us would want it also organic, okay, that it doesn't have any other undesirable chemicals in it. So the top left hand, all of these say compost on them. Okay, so those are good for vegetable gardens. Steer manure is also okay and good. Manures are good, but for the most part, you got to be careful. These are composted usually when they're in the bag. But if you get direct compost, like one time I went out to New River and got emu poop. It was quite an experience because the emus were not happy with us being in the emu pen, but they were fed organically, and I brought it back. I did not put it directly on my garden bed because I wanted to plant in there. It had to age. So I put it in my compost, and I had the quickest cooking compost I ever had. I will say though, I will probably never do that again. It was a lot of work. And the emus were kind of like a little too curious, and it was a little scary being in the pen. So anyway, manures can be used, but they should be composted. And you need to be a little careful about how those animals were fed as well. And then you'll see where it says planting compost, and you'll see composted mulch. Those are different. Composted mulch is really more like bark that's aged. Okay, it's not a compost that is, I guess, what you'd call like a living compost so much. So composted mulch is something you can put over top of the compost, the planting compost, that helps hold moisture. It shades the soil and helps hold moisture. So composted mulch is really good to put around trees that you plant. It's also good in your vegetable garden as a top cover to hold moisture. Now, this says brown mulch. That's not composted. It's also probably been artificially painted brown. And this is more for looks in a landscape. I would not recommend using that in your vegetable garden at all. Okay, so those are preferable compost, not the mulches that you see that do not say composted mulch on them. Now, ideally, there's a few places in the valley that do like worm composting, and also they have organic composting sites, and you can call them and have a delivery of compost if you want to get a lot of it. But if you're doing a small garden area, the bags would probably would be completely fine. If you want to do composting yourself, there's a variety of ways to do it. I'm not going to get into all the details of composting. I think that's another class that the city of Avondale typically provides on and off throughout various years. So these trash cans that the cities have, I do it through that. I do a small amount of composting. I used to do a huge amount. When I had my landscape business, I actually composted a lot of our stuff. And now that I just have mostly kitchen scraps, I do it with these two of these city type compost bins. Vermicomposting, that's composting with worms. The sheet mulching is considered composting as well, and I'll show you more of that. Windrows is really like if you have a lot of property and you want to make great big like mounds of compost. Typically, people will put large sticks, twigs, and even logs in there to decompose over time. And then compost tea is something that you can do pretty easily. And there's a lot of information on the internet on how to do that. So here's some ways of getting some good soil and adding nutrients to your soil as well. So I'm going to talk about different techniques that work, especially for shading and just keeping your plants thriving and alive. So this area here of my side yard, and we all have, I think, have these little side yards that are really kind of interesting because they get various amounts of shade. Sometimes the shade they get is not what you want, but this one's on my east side. So east shading is really good for vegetables. I mean, east side exposure where I get the sun in the morning and then I get the shade in the afternoon when it's really hot. And that's really good for fall crops in particular. So these tomatoes I had started and it had gotten really hot really quick. And so I'll probably do this spring. I have some transplants that I'm growing in the house that I'll put out probably around March. And I'll do some shading on them initially and maybe even later to get them started and growing real healthy. And then later, like if I'm going into like May and June when it's really, really, really hot, I will definitely shade them from the sun with 50% rate shade cloth or the burlap like you see there. So these keyhole beds, I want to go back here too. As I was saying, this was a small area. So initially I went through, I had no rock in there. It was all Bermuda grass. I put double layers of cardboard down throughout the entire area. I brought in compost and put it down. I put straw on top of that. And then I put more compost. And sometimes I just left the straw and then I would kind of push the straw away and then do my transplants in and then put the straw around it. That's basically what I was doing with sheet mulching. So I sheet mulched this whole area for a long time and had just bumper crops. I went for a while where I just couldn't keep up with that when I was still working before I retired. And so I went to these smaller beds. And I was actually also experimenting with sheet mulching within the smaller beds and seeing how that worked. So just wanted to kind of show some progression. My yard never looks the same any two years of vegetable gardening because I'm always experimenting. So the other thing I've experimented with is what's called these keyhole gardens. So there's a lot of cool things about them. The top picture there with the kitty cat, you can reach all the way around them. And as you can see on some of the writing there, if like you planted something tall like snow peas around the edge, around the outer edge of the keyhole, that will help shade the others. Artichokes, snow peas, things like that grow a little bit taller. And then you don't have to deal with all that shading thing going on. The other cool thing about keyholes, you can put them together, and that's the bottom picture. So that's a picture of a keyhole. Well, it's actually 5 keyholes within one keyhole. This is really good for small spaces. It's really good for containing your garden in one space. And you could have like a soaker hose in there, or maybe 2 of them wound around in there, and water everything at once. You could have a variety of garden plants in there and grow quite an array of vegetables all in one tight spot. with watering being very localized. Because watering out here is really, can be a chore. It can be a challenge. And, making that more simple, especially when you're first starting out. I would say anybody that's first starting out, or even if you've been gardening for a while and you just want to experiment a little bit, try at least one of these keyholes or doing an array of them. It's just kind of fun too. So this is an area where I was all Bermuda grass. And then I started just doing the cardboard and the sheet mulching. And I just went over, I called this my one woman garden for the longest time. This is how I originally started it. And I put cardboard and sheet mulched, and I went over and got the four, I had them cut. I think they were like 8 foot. Yeah, they would be 8 foot by 6-inch boards. And I just nailed them together because I didn't feel it's going to be permanent. And what I found since then, no, I don't like it permanent because I make different arrangements every year depending on what I'm going to plant. But my goal or my thoughts now is I want to plant this whole area again and take out all the little beds and just have like keyhole beds in here again. Because I've been retired for some time and I take care of my mom and dad, and my caregiving duties are not as demanding as they were. And so I'm going to start doing a little more and have a little more time. So just giving some background on, how you can make it so that your garden, you can design so that it fits your lifestyle at the time. So I'm taking all these out this year. Actually, I'm doing it this spring, bringing in truckloads of cubic yards full of organic composted material. I've gotten grass growing in this again since it's been probably 10 years since I sheet mulched real heavy in there. So I will put newspaper and cardboard all throughout the whole thing, and then put the sheet mulch on top of it, and then put straw on top of it, and that entire area will be able to be planted. So here's some more techniques that work. The sheet mulching I was talking about, and mulch pits. Mulch pits is kind of an over time thing. So you have to, whatever space you decide is going to be where your mulch pit is, you're going to leave it that way for a while. So it's kind of like digging out an area and then just starting throwing things and actually composting in it. Now the first year you won't be able to plant in there because the scraps of compostable material won't be broken down enough. But you can have a mulch pit, for a year or two, not plant anything, and then decide to plant something in it once it starts decomposing. So hydrospading and water chimneys. And this is creating, if you have really hard compacted soil, you can use a long screwdriver. You can also use, there's things called hydrospades that you can buy at any of the hardware stores. But basically what you're doing is you're pounding these in the ground, which a hydrospade, it goes in the ground with water pressure, and you're creating holes in the ground where water can start draining. So this is for places where you have really hard compacted soil. And this would be done either ideally before you actually start doing your sheet mulching. Okay, so that's a technique that helps build soil. And all of these are about building more soil, basically. Planting nitrogen fixing legumes, which I've talked about. That's any of the plants with pods, and that includes trees. Basin watering and other watering harvesting techniques. So in other words, putting you could have your keyhole garden and put a berm around it so it's higher on the outside, and then you could put a soaker hose in the middle and just let it run and fill the whole thing up. So here's how some of these look. So here's sheet mulching in just a 6 by 4 foot bed. I get a Bermuda grass and other undesirable weeds in here. And so this, as soon as I start watering, they all start growing and I don't want them. So a weed is the plant you don't want, basically, definition wise. So there's a place to keep the plants I don't want out. I put cardboard in here and then I put newspaper. If it's not really bad, the weed problem, I could just put newspaper overlap like this that you see on the top. Then you put your compost and mulch and everything over top of that and build your soil. Within 3 months, usually the newspaper and cardboard's already decomposed and creates like a mulch. So that works real well that way. This is in a whole area I was telling you about that I sheet mulched the entire area. And as you're putting this down, it's good to water it because then the wind won't blow it. And you overlap it, and then you put your layers of compost and straw and just compostable materials over top of that. And this would be similar to like some of the keyhole gardens. So this could be reconfigured every year on the pathways. Of course, this might get compacted down a little bit from walking on it. But this was all sheet mulched. And these are all, you can't tell by the picture, but they're somewhat recessed. So a soaker hose could be put in here, or even a hose bubbler, and fill the whole thing up and water it. So those are just some techniques that work, I think, especially with getting started. And again, any of these smaller bed things, like the rectangular or square, just putting them together or just digging a space out. And you have your weed control there built in, and you have your soil building, and you start getting a good start to a garden area. So again, here's a very small space. This is on my east side. All these artichokes start volunteering back. You see I have some shade structure over here because I think I had some tomatoes in there I wanted shaded. I have it near my water harvesting. And then over here again, this is at the Desert Botanical Garden, and they have a vegetable area where they have a pretty elaborate, that I'm quite envious of, shade system where they can shade on the sides or the top. Now, basin planting is really easy too. Now, you wouldn't want to plant in this right on top of this rock, but if you had something like this, a tree, and you could build this basin around it where you could just put a hose in here and it fills up. You know, you wouldn't be able to do that to start the seeds because the seeds would float, because you just need to have those sprinkled. But once things are started, you could put a soaker hose or whatever and let that water your vegetables. The tree, if it's placed well, and good placement would probably be on the west side of the bed, so that especially if you're planting in the spring or summer, so that you have you're shading your but well, I consider the vegetables in my yard are my really vulnerable babies because the most of them are not native to here, and they, even though a lot of them are sun lovers, that we have way too much for all the plants here. So here's some basin planting that works, landscaping or with vegetables. This is a rainwater harvesting with a metal roof and a ferrous cement container, and they're just using a hose, and all these are depressed beds, okay, lower than the pathway, and they fill them up through the hose by gravity feed to all these areas, okay. This is Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center. There are some herbs in here. These are not all edibles, but the same kind of idea is these beds are lower than the pathway, so the water accumulates there, and it's a good place to soil build. And then I talked previously about putting like the water chimneys. So that's like just taking that piece of rebar, pounded it in the ground, You don't have to fill it up here with these pea gravel. It will fill okay on its own with just loose soil, but it will contain and hold moisture there for plants. This is particularly good with trees on a larger scale, but to do this in your beds, like I did this before I did my sheet mulching on that one area that I showed previously. I put a lot of holes under the cardboard first, so that once everything starts decomposing, I have some good, I had compacted soil, so now I have some good aeration in the soil. Okay, succession planting. These are fava beans over here. It could be any kind of bean or a thing with a pod, a vegetable with a pod in particular, if we're talking about edibles, such as snow peas. Once you plant that, it's a really good environment for this. Okay, so a lot of people want to know how to grow tomatoes. They need nitrogen. They need nitrogen. Okay, so fava beans put the nitrogen in the soil. The next thing going in is the tomatoes. Okay, seeding versus transplants. There's some things that do a lot better transplant than putting them directly in the soil, seeds. So I built this little lean-to where I start seeds, and then I've gone to, since I retired, I have a little more time. I bought one of the Grow Light column. It's like a double decker. And now in here I'm growing, I just actually took this picture this morning, artichokes, peppers, and tomatoes. And I tend to do the variety of tomatoes. They're usually the smaller tomatoes, like the Sweet 100s and those, because it takes less time for them to mature. So the bigger the tomato here, it's going to take longer, and our growing period for tomatoes, that's really where plants are really happy. Our growing season is really short. I mean, you can grow the other ones, but you're really working against what Mother Nature is handing you in heat and lack of humidity. So other ways to water, and like as me runs the water conservation programs in Avondale, I used to run water conservation programs in Glendale, and so that's one of my big things, has always been with my gardening, is how can I water efficiently and not waste? And when you water efficiently, the other reward that you get is you don't use as much water, and the plants are healthier. So I have this awning on my back porch, and this is like a little gutter where water comes off when it rains. So when it rains, I built this, it's just 2 pieces of rebar with fencing between it to put snow peas. So it's going to grow snow peas here and here. They're right along my walkway that I take out trash and everything. So the reward for taking trash out is you get to pick some snow peas and eat them. But I like having them on the walkway, because even if I'm walking out to just look at my gardens, I always have a reward. Oh, I grew something, even though I didn't pick anything today. I can pick a snow pea and eat it. So I just eat them right off the vine that way. So anyway, when it rains, this is sloped slightly this way. All that rain will water my snow peas for me. When it's not raining, I can just put this little hose nozzle on and let it run for a little bit, and it just fills up on its own. So it's a really easy way to water. So here's the snow peas as they grow on there. None of them pickable yet. And the big thing I think I see with a lot of gardeners here is leaks. You know, we're kind of, because there's like not a lot of good choices out there for how to water your vegetable garden, we tend to try to cobble together things. And I see a lot of systems that have leaks. It probably more so than in landscapes with vegetable gardeners. So checking the leaks and getting those fixed are real important. So here's some watering systems that I feel are are probably the easiest and more efficient and appropriate for vegetable gardening. So using a hose in bubbler, that's the second one here. Here's a hose in bubbler. If you got a depressed or a square there or some way to contain it in, you can just turn it on, probably not full blast, but just run it for a period of time. If you're going to be out there to watch it, great. If you're not, put a little timer on it and check it. Let it soak in, and then you're done. And I'll give you a chart on how often to water as well. So you soak it in where it's going to, what vegetables generally need once they're maturing is the same as grass. They need watering about 4 to 6 inches down, 4 to 6 inches of moisture going into the ground. So you can test that by sticking a screwdriver in after you water and see how far down the screwdriver will go. It'll tell you how many inches of moisture those plants got. So this is one method, the hose in bubbler. You can use soaker hoses. You've probably seen these. They're like plastic, or they're not plastic, they're black, spongy material. And it's like the whole hose leaks. So you wrap it in, you put it on the end of a regular hose, and then you can wrap it into whatever area you have and turn it on. Again, finding how many minutes it takes, at what kind of pressure, and timing that is good. You can use you can have added to your regular drip irrigation these, oh gosh, now I forgot the actual name of them, but there are 4, they work really well with vegetable garden. They look like drip tubing, but they're a little more rigid and they're brown. And I usually don't recommend brands, but this is about the only brand I think you can get here is Rainbird. And you'll probably have to go to a sprinkler house to get it. You can connect, there's connections for it with your regular drip system. And then shut off valves that can go for each bed. Oh, it's laser tubing, I just remembered. So these little laser holes are through it, and you can put it on your regular system. You could put it as a zone on your irrigation system and put a timer on, with your regular timer for your landscape irrigation. So it would be a separate zone and a separate input and actually program on your timer for watering there. Okay, so that would be the type of drip irrigation I recommend. Now, I do see a lot of gardeners trying to do, because their landscapers sometimes do it for them. They want to do it the same way they do their landscape plants, where they put the black tubing in with the little spaghetti lines. Maybe with the spaghetti line that is actually like has the laser in the small spaghettis, that might work, but exactly what's in the landscape does not work really well for vegetable gardening. Okay, and then there's a lot of folks going to wicking beds out here. They can be up in the air, they're down on the ground, but basically, usually they're using some kind of containment plastic or something like that. I have avoided them mainly because I'm not real comfortable with a lot of water and heat and plastic for just the leaching possibilities of plastic. Although there are some materials you can use that are not considered that would not leach. So the wicking beds work really well, especially if you do want to go with spring vegetables or that late summer timing that I showed you earlier on and what to plant. Okay. So initially when you first start the plants, this is pretty much after you started the plants and they're up and they're 2 to 3 inches in height. Initially it's watering them enough to get the ground real wet and the seeds wet, and doing that 2 to 3 times a day. So it's a commitment to start the seeds. It's just like watering winter grass when it first gets started, like the landscapers do. So here is the landscape watering guide that the cities put out that Esme has copies of that you may have picked up. I think this is available online on AMWA as well. You could see the same thing I have up here, the little chart. So inside this booklet, it tells you how to water your landscape plants. Well, this does not say gardens on here, vegetables. What you use is vegetables use the same amount of watering and the same type of watering as grass does. But most people don't water their grass correctly. So you do have to refer to this. So if you're going to grow, let's say in October, I would say October 15th, you would go into the fall category here. So that would be this column where it says October, December in the fall. And you're going to grow, once they get started and the plants are up, then you start looking at how many days in between. I would look at them as being like annuals, every 3 to 7 days in the fall, where it says fall, October, December. If you go and line that up across with annuals, it says every 3 to 7 days you need to water those plants. That's after they're already up, after the seedlings are probably 2 to 3 inches high. And then now, December through March, it would be once every 5 to 10 days. Okay, but how long do you water it? You want to water it until it's about 6 to 8 inches deep, the water. So after you water, and you might have to time that because every system's a little different how much volume of water comes out. You poke a long screwdriver in and see how deep you can push it, and I'll tell you how deep the water went. So that's the watering schedule then for your vegetables. So edibles and aesthetics. I've kind of experimented with this because I just think vegetables are beautiful in themselves. When you look at a vegetable bed, I get as excited about a vegetable bed that has no blooms as I do a flower bed. But I just see the beauty in those plants. Maybe it's the hard work you put into it. It just gives you something to smile back about once they grow. So the blue flower on the left is flax, and that is the flax that you can eat. You can throw this out into your winter lawn and it'll grow. Of course, if you mow it, you're going to cut them off. But it grows readily if you plant it in October. And I plant a little bit of it in my yard every year, and you get blue or red flax, depending on the brown or the gold flax you get. And you can get this like the flax you get at the grocery store and put it out. Most of the seeds are viable. And the cool thing about this is I like to watch the birds. It brings in goldfinches, and I see goldfinches no other time of the year except when these flax seeds are done blooming and they're putting out their seeds. All kinds of little finches come to my yard, and it's really pretty cool watching them. And then the salad bowl in the middle there at the top, that's salad with the arugula and nasturtiums. So I always put nasturtiums in with my planting bed in the back where I'm putting more of the ornamentals. And then artichokes, when they go to seed, are just gorgeous. And then as far as fruit trees, I'm really fond of pomegranates just because they're a lot of them are more adapted to this area and not as water thirsty as citrus. And they're just beautiful when they bloom, and they look like little Christmas tree ornaments when the fruit's coming on. So just some aesthetic things with that. And same with, I like the different coloration of fava beans, and this is when they bloom before the beans come on, up at the left top. And then snow peas the peas themselves are beautiful, and the blooms are just incredible. And again, artichokes and all kinds of sunflowers that can be planted. So here's harvesting from cool season crops. The colander up at the, left top, that's just full of different kales, long kales and red kales and green kales. And then fava beans. Fava beans, I really like the plant and everything, but they are a lot of work. They taste good, but you actually have to depod them twice. And you will have the strongest thumbs in the world after you do that. It's really kind of hard to do. And then at the bottom in the colander, that is the long kale. That takes a little longer. We've been eating kale for 3 months now. But we have not been eating much long kale. We're just now starting to pick it. It takes a little longer. So you see a harvest there. You know, the kales get a bad rap because people don't like them, but I think most of it's like people don't know how to fix it. You know, we actually put ours in like a big pot and about a ½ inch of water in the bottom of the pot, put chili pepper in the water, get the water boiling, throw it all in there, put a lid on it, put a whole great big pot of kale in there, let it steam for about 15, 20 minutes, put some balsamic vinaigrette on it, and it just like melts in your mouth. It's just unbelievable. And until I found that recipe, I was always kind of like kale, ugh, you know. And even like the picture on the right at the bottom, where sometimes if your kale's too far along and it's getting real stemmy, you can cut the stems off. But if you do that method, a lot of times it softens it right up, and the stems are really easy to eat as well. And we also just in the morning, the scrambled eggs, we'll go out pick some kale. I put it in the frying pan. Put the kale in first, a little bit of water, cook it down for about a minute or two, and then throw the scrambled eggs in it. So I eat like a good 2 handfuls of kale that way because it cooks down to almost nothing. But very tasty and very nutritious in those manners. So once you start gardening over a period of years, you'll see volunteers, and I don't fight them. I invite them. So on the left, you'll see that's actually a volunteer tomato with volunteer cilantro around that, and then long kale there. Now the volunteer tomatoes, they'll come in as cherry tomatoes. So that's the only drawback on that. You'll go through all that pampering and not get a really big tomato out of it. And then up at the right top, that's purslane. That will come in the spring a lot, especially if we have spring rains. Knock on wood on that one because, wow, it will be really great if we do have some spring rains. But anyway, make sure you can ID it. Look at it online because there is another type of plant that's similar to it that is not edible. But this is very nutritious, purslane is. And then at the bottom, you see an artichoke in a bed that came up on its own from the previous year. And then outside that square, you'll see a taller, bushy looking plant. It has some white flowers on it. That's arugula. If you plant arugula in your garden, the flowers are edible and just real tasty and tangy and really good to put on salads. But it will reseed from year to year. You'll have it for many years to come because it'll just throw seed all over. So here's my back. What was a lawn. In fact, my entire property was wall-to-wall grass when I moved in. This was the last area I took grass out. I took the grass out using a method of putting cardboard over it over a period of time. So I'm killing the grass at the same time I'm building soil and compost. And it just keeps composting down. It doesn't build up to my yard is like a foot taller than it was. It just composts down. And you don't really get that buildup. So I just started experimenting, throwing flax seed, nasturtium, all those things that'll grow if you throw them out in October and start, they'll actually start blooming and coming to their maturity in probably around March. So I put this in, I have a sprinkler system in there, so I use that. And then I started putting edibles in it. So here are not edibles, but you see the winter grass that came in. I like winter grass because it's not invasive. It doesn't come back year after year. But I don't like Bermuda grass. That's just my own little personal thing. But The plant in the middle is a California poppy, wildflower, and then purple lupine, and then globe mallow up in the right top corner with some orange. That just blew in on its own, and it's like a wildflower here too. So these are wildflowers planted within the winter grass that I put out. So that came, that happened after I did this project. Now I decided to put these little round fence cylinders out because I started that year, I planted everything in vegetables and I ran out of room. And so I decided to put snow peas in my backyard with the wildflowers. So when I planted it all, I put the newspaper down to keep any weeds that might have been in there. And then I put compost over that, and then I planted the snow pea seeds. And then that was a trellis, cylinder trellises for the snow peas to grow. And it turned into like a jungle in there. That's when it was first coming in. You see the winter grass came in first, then you can barely see the snow peas coming in, and then there's some brittle bush that blew in, just seeding itself. So some wildflower kind of things. And then I put flax in the center. So the blue flax started blooming in the center, and then the snow peas were growing, blooming white. And then eventually everything's like 2 to 3 feet high up there. And I had lupines, that's the purple in the background you see, and everything was growing in there, blue flax. And I do this every year and plant different things. This year I got less flax and more nasturtium. And I actually threw just regular vegetables in it and snow peas. And it's just my play thing out in the yard to experiment with every year. So I do recommend, if you have a space that you can have fun with, do that. Where if it doesn't work, you're like, oh, well, you know, and you're not having like this big investment in, oh, I really want these tomatoes to grow kind of thing. It's like, I'm going to throw this out and see what happens, you know. And if you're throwing the seeds out that actually germinate that time of year, you can have a lot of fun with it, and it'll attract all kinds of interesting songbirds and things like that that you never see ever otherwise. I plant sunflowers in there. All those types of things. I just experiment. So here's some resources. Really get on the University of Arizona Maricopa Cooperative Extension. They're the folks that have the Master Gardener program. You can access the Master Gardener manual, and you don't have to be a Master Gardener. And what you want to do is go on there and get their planting calendar. When to plant what plants. And I'll tell you right now, if you have a question, if you're really enthused and you're ready to go this month and plant, here's a list of things that can be planted now by seed. Kales, lettuce, peas, peppers, radish, Swiss chard, spinach, tomatoes, but really they're better started inside or getting transplants. Turnips, beets, and carrots, and eggplant later in the month. So those are some things that can be planted now. Now you can get your own list of all that, you know, month by month, what can be planted by getting the planting calendar. And then there's the earth-friendly desert gardening if you want some really general information about landscape and vegetables. I actually was a co-author on that publication when I worked up there. And then a book that I am just like crazy gaga about as far as being very specific to Southwest fruit and vegetable gardening. And this is a Tucson author. It's the way the book looks. And she's amazing. She gets down to, in this, you know, in the fall you grow this, and these are the varieties that do best in the desert. So she tells you what varieties of fruit, like pomegranates are sold all over here, but we sell wonderful. They do fine in Tucson. They do not do well in Phoenix. The plant will grow well, but the fruit never does really well. So she has the varieties of pomegranates that would work here in the Phoenix area. She has it that detailed down to the varieties of the vegetables and fruits to look for. So I can't say enough about that book. It's a good investment. So I know I'm not supposed to promote like one thing over another, but there's so few guides out there that are specific to our area that these are the ones that are very, very specific to our area. And with that, I'll turn it over to Esme, and I think we have some time for questions as well.
Oh, right. That's great. That's super. So I don't think I introduced myself at the beginning. My name is Esme Avila, and I'm the City of Avondale Water Conservation Coordinator. So we're bringing together some courses, some talks on the landscaping to help you manage your water and have a lush landscape out there. So in the chat, I don't know if you've been able to follow, but I attached the composting 101 recipe. So if you want to start a little compost pile, I also included the landscape watering guide link. So you can go directly to wateruserwisely.com and you'll find other links as well on watering and tips on how to save water indoors and out. And I included a vegetable gardening survey. So if you can let us know how we're doing and what topics you're interested in. And so we can get that information to you and plan for future classes on those topics. And then also I just uploaded the vegetable planting calendar from the Maricopa County, Maricopa Cooperative Extension Office. So you can have it right there. Also I want to tell you about a new water use calculator through AMWA, which is the Arizona Municipal Water User Association. We've created a water use calendar. So you can go, water use calculator. So you can go in and, I always get this question, how much water should I be using? And now we have a good idea. You can go in and just answer a few questions. You can go to our website at well, I'll write it down in the chat room. But you can go in there, it's avondaleaz.gov/water use calculator, and it'll take you directly to that page. And all you need is just there's a few questions to answer, and then you can have an idea of what you should be using in your home, or at least an estimate of what you should be using. Let me see, what else do I have? Oh, a question earlier in the talk was, how do we measure alkaline? So I think it was Lanny that asked that. And I believe it was in the soil. And yeah. Do you know what?
I'm not sure if I heard that.
The question was, how do we measure alkalinity, the alkaline in the soil or?
Oh, okay. You probably have it. I would say 99% your soil is alkaline. You can take it to a lab and have it tested. There also are ways to, I forgot exactly how you do it, but you put it in a jar and if it fizzes, if you put something like vinegar on it and it fizzes, then it's probably alkaline.
Oh, yeah.
But that's a real general test at home.
But the
kind of
majority
like
of the
fun
time,
thing to do with kids if you can control, the vinegar part. But you have alkaline soil, you do. Yeah. Now, if you've been amending throughout the time, you probably have better soil if you put compost and stuff in it. But, that stuff decomposes down to you can't hardly find it anymore sometimes. You just have to really keep doing it every year. No matter what your soil is, I really kind of recommend putting additional soil, composted soil on at least every other year. Because vegetables, and especially if you're intensively planting, I intensively plant a lot, really close together, then you are using up the nutrients in the soil, and we'll need to replenish it with compost. And then I use that shake and feed as well. especially for the high nitrogen users, which are like cabbages and broccoli. And then in the winter, nitrogen is not available in the soil as well as it is in the summer because the soil's cold and it's harder for it to absorb. So that's another reason for the broccoli and stuff that I make sure I add a little bit for that and for tomatoes as well.
Okay. No, that's great. And planting under a Palo Verde tree or a mesquite tree would, well, actually a mesquite tree, that would help with the nitrogen fixing as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're doing their own nitrogen fixing. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I had a question. The tree by your house, by the window in the far, in one of the slides, is that a cascalodi?
Yeah, it was.
Oh, okay.
It's a giant one.
It was blooming, and I was like, oh, I like that for winter.
And it's that big. Most of them you see will not be that big. I never water that. The reason it's so big, I built a dry pond there, and the water that comes off my roof feeds that.
Oh.
So when it gets water, it has deep water, and the roots go deep on that.
That's nice.
So that's why it's that big. You won't see most people having their cascalodi that big. And I've had people ask me, why are you watering your cascalodi so much? I said, Mother Nature's watering it.
Yeah. That's watering.
Yeah.
And I had a question on the keyhole gardens. So there would be no, what size would you say that is, like 2 to 3 feet wide? Or
well, if you want one where you can like reach over, you know, either on a little stool or on your knees and reach over. I mean, you could, yeah, you could build it any size you want.
Okay. Just as long as you can reach over.
Yeah, but if you can access all sides, you could make it a little like thicker. You can make it bigger.
Okay.
So you could go on the outside and access it. The whole idea is you generally don't want to walk on your vegetable garden to compact soil. Yeah.
Right. Okay. That sounds great. Does anyone have any other questions? Lanny Guillaume says, thank you for all the great info, and thank you. And Yuli Main says, thank you. I really enjoy your presentation. So
thank you.
We really always enjoy it.
I love talking about this, and I'm very fortunate that Esme has this forum where I can do that. So thank you, City of Avondale and Esme.
Thank you.
I know you work hard during the week, and now you're working on Saturday. So
it's a fun day. If anyone has, and Megan says, thank you so much. It was a great presentation, and Jennifer as well. Thank you. And if you have any questions, feel free to contact me. I think most everyone has my email, but let me just write it down. And then if you need any additional information on vegetable gardening or watering, anything, just give me send me a quick note, and I'd be happy to help. Thank you, Jill.
Thank you, Esme.
All right.
Have a good Saturday.
Have a great afternoon.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.